Nathan Reed had just turned 18, a momentous occasion that he celebrated with a few too many drinks, some questionable decisions, and a lifetime's worth of regret. His mother, Cassandra Reed, had always been the kind of woman who turned heads, young looking for her age, fiercely independent, and someone who could outdrink most of Nathan's friends. Having had him at a young age, she often joked that they were more like siblings than mother and son. Perhaps in a way, that had been part of the problem. Nathan's birthday party was supposed to be a small gathering, just a few friends, some music, and maybe a couple of beers. But as word spread, more people showed up, bringing alcohol, bad decisions, and chaos in their wake. By midnight, their modest house had turned into an overcrowded scene of loud music, reckless drinking, and teenagers pushing every boundary imaginable. Empty bottles littered the kitchen counters. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the bass of the music rattled the windows. Cassandra, initially trying to play the cool mom, had a drink in hand and was laughing along with the partygoers. She always prided herself on being open and approachable, but somewhere between her third and fourth glass of whiskey, she stopped caring about playing the responsible adult. The line between parent and friend blurred, and by the time most of Nathan's friends had either passed out or stumbled their way home, only he and Cassandra remained in the dimly lit living room. Nathan, slurring his words, collapsed onto the couch, his mind spinning from too much liquor. Cassandra sat beside him, kicking off her heels and rubbing her temples. They were both exhausted, intoxicated, and tangled in a night that had spiraled too far out of control. Then came the mistake, one neither of them fully remembered but would forever regret. When Cassandra found out she was pregnant, she was frozen between disbelief and horror. At first, she convinced herself the baby must have been conceived from a casual fling she had months before. But when the dates didn't add up, and after a gut-wrenching confession from Nathan, whose memory of that night was just as foggy, the truth became undeniable. It was a mistake. A tragic, unthinkable mistake. But it was real. Nathan refused to believe it at first. He begged her to consider every other possibility, desperately searching for a way out of the nightmare they had created. They sat together at the kitchen table, both pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The clock ticked between them, marking every agonizing second of silence before Cassandra finally whispered, "There's no other explanation." Nathan's stomach churned. He wanted to vomit, to scream, to run away and never look back. But where could he go? His entire life had been rewritten in an instant, every memory tainted with something too grotesque to comprehend. Cassandra withdrew into herself. She avoided mirrors, avoided town, avoided Nathan. She quit her job, making up some excuse about needing time off, though everyone suspected something was wrong. The nausea that came with the pregnancy felt like a cruel punishment, a constant reminder of what had happened that night. Nathan's friends noticed the change in him too. He stopped responding to texts, skipped school, and when he did show up, he barely spoke. Rumors started. Maybe he'd gotten into trouble, maybe he was on drugs. The truth was so much worse, and he knew that if anyone ever found out, they would never look at him the same way again. Late at night, Cassandra sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling. Could she go through with this? Could she bring this child into the world, knowing the burden it would carry? And more than that, could she live with herself if she didn't? Nathan, locked in his room, wrestled with a different question. Could he face a future where this mistake followed him forever? Where every choice he made, every moment of happiness, was overshadowed by the weight of that night? Neither of them had answers. But time was cruel, and it didn't stop to wait for them to figure things out. Their small town in Minnesota was the kind where everyone knew everyone's business before they even knew it themselves. Cassandra and Nathan faced the unimaginable. How do you go on knowing you've done the unthinkable? Cassandra knew the truth could never come out. The consequences would be unbearable. So she crafted a lie, one she would have to live with for the rest of her life. She told friends, coworkers, and neighbors that she had reconnected with an old flame from her past, a man who had left town years ago but had recently come back into her life. She wove details together carefully, saying he had been passing through, that they had rekindled something brief, and that he had since left again. It was the only way to keep people from asking too many questions. The town buzzed with gossip, but no one suspected the truth. Some found it romantic. Cassandra, the single mother who had sacrificed so much for her son, finally finding love again. Others were skeptical, but had no reason to doubt her. Nathan, however, struggled to keep up the facade. He avoided looking at his mother's growing belly, each glimpse a reminder of what he wanted to forget. At school, he dodged questions from curious classmates. "So, you're gonna have a sibling, huh?" they'd ask, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. At home, the tension between them was suffocating. They barely spoke, and when they did, the words were clipped, mechanical. Nathan buried himself in distractions: long drives with no destination, mind numbing video games, alcohol, anything to keep the thoughts at bay. Cassandra, on the other hand, fought to maintain normalcy. She forced smiles in the grocery store, accepted congratulations with a nod, and even started attending a prenatal yoga class to keep up appearances. But at night, when she was alone, the weight of it crushed her. She would press her hand against her belly, feeling the life growing inside her, and wonder how she would ever face the day when this child, this innocent, unknowing soul, would start asking questions. Would she ever be able to tell the truth? Could she love this baby without the past haunting her? Then came the moment that nearly shattered her carefully constructed lie. A woman from Cassandra's past, Margaret, an old high school friend who had moved away and recently returned, ran into her at the pharmacy. "I heard the news," Margaret said, her voice dripping with curiosity. "So, who's the lucky guy?" Cassandra forced a smile. "Oh, just someone from way back. It didn't work out, but it happened." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Funny, I don't remember you mentioning anyone the last time we talked." Cassandra felt her pulse quicken. "It was sudden." Margaret leaned in slightly, her gaze sharp. "You know, it's a small town, Cass. Secrets have a way of coming out." Cassandra laughed nervously and made a quick exit, but the encounter left her shaken. Margaret was right. Secrets never stayed buried forever. And no matter how well she played the part, all it would take was one slip, one misplaced word, and the entire facade would crumble. And then what? The worst happened on a cold November evening. Nathan had been missing for 2 days. No texts, no calls. Cassandra tried to tell herself that he was just blowing off steam, but the gnawing fear in her gut wouldn't let her rest. She barely slept, pacing the house, jumping every time the phone buzzed. The town wasn't big, but it was filled with eyes, and she knew that if he wasn't careful, someone would notice his unraveling. Then the sheriff showed up. Sheriff Darnell Baker had been a fixture in their town for over 20 years. A man with kind eyes, but a no-nonsense demeanor. He had watched Nathan grow up, had even coached his little league team. Seeing him standing at the doorstep, hat in hand, sent a wave of nausea through Cassandra. "We found Nathan," Baker said, his voice measured. "He's at the station." Cassandra barely heard the rest of his words. Something about a bar fight. About Nathan being found passed out behind Mac's Tavern, reeking of whiskey, blood crusted on his lip from a punch he didn't even remember taking. About how he had been muttering nonsense before he blacked out. Something about ruining everything, about a baby. She thanked Baker, pulled on a coat, and drove straight to the station. Nathan was slumped in a holding cell, head in his hands. When she stepped in, he didn't look up. The bruises on his knuckles told her he had been fighting more than just some drunk at a bar. He had been fighting himself. She sat beside him, staring at the scuffed floor. "You can't do this," she said softly. "You can't fall apart on me." Nathan let out a hollow laugh. "I already have." Cassandra swallowed, steadying herself. "I'll talk to Baker. He'll let you go with a warning. But you can't keep doing this. Drinking yourself stupid. Getting into fights. Someone's going to start asking questions." Nathan turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "And then what, Mom?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Then what?" Cassandra didn't have an answer. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Nathan, after his release, tried to keep himself together, but the cracks were impossible to ignore. He barely went to school. His teachers called, concerned. Friends reached out, but he ignored them. The only thing keeping him from vanishing completely was the silent agreement between him and Cassandra. They would pretend. They would act as if none of this was happening, as if the lie could somehow become the truth if they played their parts well enough. But then Margaret came back. She showed up at Cassandra's front door, her expression unreadable. I know, she said. Cassandra felt her stomach drop. Know what? She asked, voice even. Margaret exhaled, stepping forward. I know the dates don't add up. I know there was no old flame. And I know Nathan's been acting like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Cassandra felt the walls closing in. You don't know anything. Margaret shook her head. Cass, listen to me. I don't want to hurt you, but people are talking. You need to figure out what you're going to do before someone else starts digging. Panic clawed at Cassandra's throat. She could feel her carefully constructed world beginning to shatter piece by piece, and she had no idea how to stop it. Because deep down, she knew Margaret was right. Nathan was spiraling again, and Cassandra could see it. He had started skipping meals, locking himself in his room for hours and barely speaking a word to her. When he did, it was either a cold, emotionless exchange or an explosion of anger that left her feeling even more helpless. One night, she found him sitting on the back porch, a bottle of whiskey resting between his knees. We can't keep doing this, Nathan muttered, his voice thick with frustration. Cassandra sighed, sitting down next to him. I know, but we don't have a choice. Nathan scoffed. There's always a choice. But you made one for both of us, didn't you? He turned to face her, his expression raw and filled with something close to hatred. You decided we'd lie. You decided we'd pretend. And now I have to live with it. Cassandra clenched her fists. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I don't wake up every single day wishing I could change everything? Her voice cracked, and she fought back the tears. But I can't, Nathan. I can't. And neither can you. Nathan shot to his feet, knocking over the bottle. So what? We just live like this, with this secret poisoning us from the inside out? Until one day someone like Margaret figures it all out and we're ruined? Cassandra stood too, her face set in determination. Margaret doesn't know anything for sure. She's suspicious, but that's all. And as long as you keep yourself together, no one will ever know. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. You really think I can keep myself together? He gestured to himself, his sunken eyes, the tremble in his hands, the weight he had lost. Look at me, Mom. Look at what this is doing to me. I'm not strong enough for this. For the first time in weeks, Cassandra saw the truth in his words. He wasn't just angry. He was breaking. She reached out, but he stepped back. Nathan. No. He cut her off, shaking his head. I can't do this anymore. I need out. Panic surged through Cassandra's chest. What are you saying? Nathan exhaled shakily. I'm saying that maybe it's time I told the truth. Cassandra's breath caught. Number, you can't. Nathan's jaw tightened. Why not? It's the only way I stop feeling like I'm suffocating. She grabbed his arm, desperation in her grip. Because if you do, we lose everything. Everything, Nathan? Do you understand that? You think people are just going to let this go? That we can move on once it's out in the open? Number, they will destroy us. Nathan looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in weeks. And then something in his expression shifted. Maybe we deserve to be destroyed. The words struck her harder than any punch ever could. Before she could respond, Nathan turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the cold night air, her world unraveling even faster than before. For years, Cassandra had concealed the truth behind a veil of lies. Each time her daughter asked about her father, she invented another story. A sailor lost at sea, a musician who never returned from tour. But as her daughter grew, the lies became heavier, suffocating Cassandra each night when she was alone with her thoughts. Emma turned 14 when everything changed. She came home from school one day with questions about genetics, noticing how her brown eyes matched neither her mother's green ones nor the imaginary father's blue. Mom, she said that evening as they sat in their small kitchen, something doesn't add up in your stories. Cassandra felt cold sweat on her back. She tried to deflect, but Emma wouldn't relent. I'm not a child anymore. I alters, her daughter insisted, her gaze surprisingly sharp. I deserve to know who I am, where I come from. The silence that followed seemed endless. The kitchen clock ticked away, seconds that stretched into eternity. Memories flooded back. The colleagues' party 15 years ago, too much alcohol, blurred faces, then darkness in a hallway, strong hands ignoring her pleas to stop, and the terrible helplessness. She had never told anyone, even during pregnancy when everyone asked who the father was. Shame and fear had sealed her lips. And then, the baby. Her greatest miracle and most terrible reminder rolled into one. Cassandra couldn't help but love her daughter, even when certain facial features made her heart freeze with horror. Emma, she began, her voice barely audible. Your father, it's not a beautiful story. The room grew so quiet they could hear water dripping from the leaky faucet. The thin trickle of truth became a flood, and Cassandra couldn't stop it. She told her about that night, about the pain and shame, about her fear of not being able to love a child born from such an act, and about how those fears crumbled to dust the moment newborn Emma was placed in her arms. I've never regretted having you, Cassandra said, her face wet with tears. But I've always been afraid you would hate me when you learned the truth, that you would feel unwanted. She expected anything: screaming, accusations, a door slamming. Instead, after a long silence, Emma stood and walked to her mother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but they held neither disgust nor hatred. Emma knelt before her mother and took her trembling hands. Mom, she whispered, her voice quiet but firm. I don't care how I came into this world. I only care that I have you. Cassandra looked at her daughter through tears, hardly believing what she heard. Years of fear, shame, and loneliness. And suddenly this girl, who had every reason to hate her origins, spoke words that began to heal. That night, the burden of shame and heartbreak didn't disappear completely. Such wounds don't heal overnight. But for the first time in 15 years, Cassandra felt she could breathe more freely. Life had given her a child through the worst trauma of her existence, but it had also given her a reason to keep living. And though the shadow of the past would always follow them, Cassandra knew they could now move forward together, carrying the only thing stronger than pain and fear: love that overcomes even the darkest secrets.